Publicly, Kiev government started to say that they were not going to follow through on these agreements. What else can you say here? The first people in the government publicly stated that. What else can you expect? Do you expect to continue us watching people abusing, the Kiev government abusing citizens on these territories? It's impossible to do that. You see yourself what is happening there. How can you just watch us? Our colleagues, when we spoke to them, European colleagues, used to say the same thing. Yes, you have to follow this agreement, you have to follow the agreement, but they couldn't force the Kiev government to follow through on the agreement. So we had to make that decision. So in this respect, yes, Minsk agreements, they're still, in existence. As for the borders, what borders will be recognized as the borders of these republics? We have already recognized them. That means we have recognized all fundamental documents and their constitution. And constitution determines the borders of Donetsk and Luhansk regions while they were part of Ukraine. But we are counting on resolution of all these differences. That these differences will be sorted out between Kiev government and Luhansk and Donetsk regions. But for the moment, we understand that this is probably impossible in this current situation. But we're hoping for this to happen in the future. As for using military force abroad, of course, we signed an agreement yesterday. And in these agreements with Donetsk and Lugansk Public Republic, there are relevant points which state that we are going to continue. We will provide all type of assistance, including military assistance. If there is a conflict, of course, if it's necessary, we will follow through on the obligations that we undertook. Also a question on Donbass. Ukraine does not want the sovereignty of these two republics, and our decision, and they're not happy with our decision. Sorry, what did you say? I'm saying that these republics are not recognized by Kiev, and they're not happy with our decision either. Yes. After what happened today and yesterday, do you see any prospects for rehabilitating the relationships between Kiev and Moscow? What should Moscow do and what should Kiev do in this regard? We did discuss these questions in our negotiations with our European partners and also with Americans. I think it was not said publicly, but I'll say this. Naturally, the question is, what do both parties have to do from Kiev side, from our side, so that we could regulate this issue in the long-term historic perspective, so we could coexist friendly without any military conflicts. I'll disclose this secret. First thing that needs to be done is to recognize the will of the people in Sevastopol and in Crimea. And I would like to emphasize, how is this will of people worse than the will of people of Kosovo? So in Kosovo, it was a formal decision. Here, it was done through a referendum. Nobody could force people under barrels to come and vote. They just came voluntarily and they voted. And you have to respect that decision. So, and those who consider themselves to be democratic countries, they have to recognize this fact. This is number one. Second, so we are saying this publicly, and this is one of the questions around which we have disagreements with Washington and NATO. We are categorically against Ukraine joining NATO because this is a threat to us. And I've mentioned that many times. And in this relation, of course, our position is based on what many people say, including people in the Western capitals, that the best resolution of this issue would be, so that our colleagues in the West do not lose their face, the best thing to do would be for Kiev authorities not to make a decision not to join NATO and become neutral. That's number two. Number three, unfortunately, this is no longer current. I always said that we needed to resolve Donbass issue through peaceful negotiations and through implementation of Minsk agreements. And fourth is the most important thing. Everything that's been said before, all of that can be turned upside down if our so-called partners continue to pump Kiev authorities with modern types of weapons. So the most important point is a certain degree of demilitarization of current Ukraine, because this is the only factor that you can objectively control and that you can react to and you can monitor. Otherwise, all other points can be turned around how it's been done by the current head of Ukraine, where they're trying to persecute the former leader of Ukraine through criminal means or through means of criminal law and so on. So the same thing can be done to any other agreements that I just mentioned now. And then the person can just flee to Washington, Berlin, or Paris. And we would just stay here with these issues. This is not acceptable. This is not acceptable, especially after the current leadership of Ukraine announced their nuclear ambitions. Yesterday, in your address to Russians, you mentioned Zelensky's words that, in his words, Ukraine might have nuclear weapons again. Is it just his words, or do we have an actual threat that near our borders in Ukraine there'll be nuclear weapons? I just mentioned this now. We understand that these words were addressed to us, and I would like to say that, yes, we heard them. Ukraine, since Soviet times, had quite an extensive nuclear competences. They've got several nuclear units, and their nuclear industry is well developed. They've got schools, they've got everything. In order to much quicker resolve this issue compared to other countries where they're trying to build it from the ground. I'm not going to mention those. You're familiar with these situations. And there's only one thing lacking: enrichment system. But it's just a technical question. For Ukraine, this is not an unresolvable issue. As for means of delivery or rockets, there are old Soviet rockets, point U, and that's about 110-kilometer range. And what is the threat to us? that even the appearance of tactical nuclear weapons for us means strategic threat. This is something that we have to take into account, because 110 kilometers can be increased to 300 to 500 kilometers, and then Moscow will be within the reach of these rockets. For us, this is a strategic threat, and this is how we perceived it. And of course, in a very serious way, we have to treat this, and we will treat this in this way. Kolesnikov. Andrei Kolesnikov, Kommersant. Vladimir Vladimirovich, what is your opinion? Do you think that in the modern world, is it possible to resolve things through force and be on the side of good? And the second question is a technical question. In your opinion, how far can military go to the administrative borders or to the front line? First of all, I'd like to say that the military force will go there straight after our meeting here. Secondly, it's impossible to predict the course of events. It will be dependent on the situation on the ground. And the question to do with force and whether you can stay on the side of good, why do you think that good should always be powerless? I do not think so. I think that good presumes the ability to defend yourself.